When a forbidden love letter hits the marble floor of the imperial banquet hall, and every eye in the room turns to Empress Seraphina Vale, the court expects blood. They expect screaming, tears, maybe even a blade drawn across a throat. What they get instead is something far more terrifying: silence. The kind of silence that makes powerful men shift in their seats and wonder if they've already lost a game they didn't know they were playing. Because here's the truth nobody wants to admit: a woman who stops fighting for a man's attention isn't broken. She's just done wasting her time. Stick around till the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know where my tribe is watching from. You're going to want to see how this empress burns an entire empire to the ground without raising her voice once. The wine in Seraphina's glass trembled, not from her hand was steady as stone. The tremor came from the collective-held breath of 300 nobles packed into the Hall of Radiant Dawn, all of them watching the cream-colored parchment that had just slipped from the silk robes of the emperor's personal messenger and landed face up on the floor between the high table and the rest of the court. The messenger, a boy barely 16 with sweat already darkening his collar, stood frozen. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish drowning in air. Seraphina didn't look at him. She looked at the letter. From her position at the head table, elevated 3 steps above the banquet floor, she could see everything: the slanted handwriting, the wax seal, broken and dangling, the way several lords in the front row craned their necks, trying to make out the words that had scattered across that piece of paper like a poison nobody had asked to drink. She could also see her husband. Emperor Luciche Draven sat to her right, his goblet halfway to his lips, his face doing that thing it always did when he was caught, blank as fresh snow, eyes slightly narrowed, jaw set just tight enough to look regal instead of panicked. He was good at this. 17 years of marriage had taught her that much. He could lie with his face better than most men could lie with their mouths. But Seraphina had spent those same 17 years learning to read the spaces between his lies. And right now, those spaces were screaming. The hall stayed silent. Somewhere near the back, a woman coughed. Another noble, Lord Varen, shifted his weight and his chair scraped against marble. The sound sharp enough to make half the room flinch. Still, no one spoke. Seraphina set down her wine glass. The soft clink of crystal on wood might as well have been a thunderclap. Every head in the room turned toward her. She could feel their stares like hands pressing against her skin. Hungry stares, anticipatory, the kind of attention people gave to executions and street fights and women about to shatter in public. They wanted a show. They wanted her to scream, to throw the glass, to demand the girl's name, to call for guards, to do something that would confirm what they all believed, that an empress scorned was an empress destroyed. Instead, Seraphina stood. The rustle of her gown, heavy silk the color of winter midnight, was the only sound in the entire hall. She descended the 3 steps with the same measured grace she used every single day of her life, her spine straight, her face calm, her hands folded at her waist. She walked across the floor. The nobles parted like water. She stopped in front of the letter, looked down at it, let the silence stretch until it became a living thing, coiling around throats and squeezing. Then she bent, picked it up, and read it. Not quickly, not with shaking hands or tears or any of the reactions they expected. She read it the way she read treaty proposals and tax records and every other document that crossed her desk. Thoroughly, carefully, with the same cool attention she gave to anything that might be used against her later. The letter was exactly what she'd suspected the moment it hit the floor. My dearest light, the hours away from you are endless. I count them like a miser counts gold, hoarding every memory of your touch, your voice, your laughter in the dark. The Empress suspects nothing. She is too consumed with her duties, her endless meetings, her cold and lifeless dedication to appearances. She does not see me as you do. She never has. When the moon festival ends, I will find a way to bring you into the light where you belong. No more hiding, no more shadows. I swear it on the crown itself. Yours beyond reason, L. Seraphina folded the letter. The sound of the crease was loud enough to make the messenger flinch. She turned and walked back to the high table, set the letter down beside her wine glass, sat down, picked up her fork, and took a bite of roasted pheasant. The hall erupted. Not loudly, not violently, but the whispers started immediately. a hissing rush of shock and confusion and gleeful horror spreading from table to table like plague through a slum. Lord Varen leaned toward his wife and muttered something behind his hand. Duchess Callan covered her mouth, eyes wide, flicking between Serafina and the Emperor like she was watching a duel. Count Fabian actually smiled, the smug bastard, probably already calculating how this scandal would shift the balance of power in his favor. And at the center of it all, Lucien sat motionless, his goblet still raised, his face still blank. But Serafina saw the muscle twitch in his jaw, saw the way his knuckles whitened around the stem of the glass, saw the exact moment he realized she wasn't going to give him the reaction he could manage, the explosion he could apologize for, the tears he could dismiss as hysteria. She was giving him nothing, and that, she knew, was the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. The banquet continued. Servants brought out the next course. Musicians in the corner, who had stopped playing the moment the letter fell, hesitantly picked up their instruments again. The mechanical rhythm of a court gathering resumed, but it was wrong now, off balance, like a clock with a broken gear. Serafina ate her meal. She spoke when spoken to, laughed quietly at Duke Corvin's terrible joke about fishing taxes, complimented Lady Ashara on her gown, played the role she had perfected over nearly 2 decades, the perfect empress, unshakable, gracious, above the petty chaos of human emotion. But inside, beneath the silk and the smile and the carefully controlled breath, she was calculating. The letter had said the empress suspects nothing. Wrong. She'd known about the affair for 3 months. Not this specific woman, not yet, but she'd known something was happening. The late-night council meetings that ran until dawn. The way Lucien's eyes slid past her at breakfast. The scent of perfume on his collars, too sweet and too young to be hers. She'd known. And she'd waited. Because women like Serafina Vale didn't survive imperial courts by reacting. They survived by watching, listening, gathering every loose thread until they had enough to weave a noose. The banquet finally ended 2 hours later. Nobles filed out in clusters, their voices low and eager, already spinning the story into a dozen different versions that would be all over the capital by morning. The Empress had wept. No, she'd raged. No, she'd done nothing at all, which was somehow worse. Lucien stood and offered her his arm. She took it. They walked together down the hall of radiant dawn, past the guards standing at attention, past the flickering lanterns that cast their shadows long and distorted across the walls. Neither of them spoke. They reached the imperial wing, where their separate chambers branched off in opposite directions. This was the moment where, on any other night, Lucien would kiss her hand, murmur something polite, and disappear into his rooms to sleep alone or write letters or fuck whoever he'd smuggled past the guards. Tonight, he hesitated. Serafina waited. Finally, he cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was careful, too careful. You handled that well. She looked at him. His face was still doing that blank thing, that regal mask he wore so easily. But his eyes were different now. There was something in them she hadn't seen in years. Fear. Did I? She said. It wasn't a question. Lucien's jaw tightened. You didn't cause a scene. The court respects that. The court, she said slowly, respects power, not restraint. She let go of his arm. Lucien's hand hovered in the air for a second, like he wanted to reach for her, then dropped. Serafina, we should talk about this. Should we? Again, not a question. He took a step closer, lowered his voice. It was a mistake. The letter. I don't know how it ended up in that boy's pocket, but it was a mistake. Serafina tilted her head. The affair or getting caught? Lucien's face finally cracked. Just a hairline fracture, a flash of frustration breaking through the imperial calm. Don't do this. Do what? Turn this into something it isn't. And what is it, Lucien? He exhaled hard through his nose, looked away, looked back. You've always known I have needs you don't meet. The air between them went cold. Serafina smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd just been handed a knife and was deciding where to put it. You're right, she said softly. I've always known. Then we can move past this. Of course we can. Lucien's shoulders relaxed. Just slightly. Just enough to tell her he'd mistaken her calm for forgiveness. Idiot. Good, he said, I'll have the girl removed from court. Quietly. No scandal. And we'll carry on as we always have. Seraphina's smile didn't move. As we always have. Yes. She nodded once, short, final. Then she turned and walked toward her chambers, leaving him standing alone in the corridor. She didn't look back. Behind her, she heard him let out a breath he'd been holding. Heard his footsteps retreat toward his own rooms, confident now, relieved, certain he'd dodged the worst of it. Men, Seraphina thought as she pushed open the door to her chambers, were always so easy to fool when they wanted to believe they'd won. Her rooms were dark except for the low fire burning in the hearth. Her head lady-in-waiting, Mira, stood near the window, her hands clasped, her face tight with worry. Your Majesty. Seraphina closed the door, locked it, walked to the writing desk in the corner and sat down. Mira hurried over. Everyone's talking about the letter. They're saying you've been humiliated. They're saying you'll have to act or lose respect. They're saying... Who is she? Mira stopped, blinked. Your Majesty? The girl, Seraphina said, pulling out a blank sheet of parchment and dipping a pen in ink. The one my husband is fucking. Who is she? Mira hesitated, then quietly. Lady Isolde Varn. She's 22, daughter of Marquis Varn, minor house, Southern Territories. She's been at court for 8 months. Seraphina wrote the name down. What else? She's known for being beautiful, soft-spoken. The Emperor started paying attention to her after the spring gala. It's been regular since then. She has a private room in the East Wing. Seraphina's pen didn't stop moving. Who else knows? Everyone, Mira whispered, or everyone suspects. But no one's dared to speak openly until tonight. And the letter. Mira bit her lip. We don't know how it ended up with the messenger. The boy swears he doesn't know where it came from. Some think it was planted. A move by one of the noble houses to destabilize you. Or to destabilize Lucien, Seraphina said. Mira frowned. Your Majesty? Seraphina finished writing and set down the pen. Think, Mira. If someone wanted me out of the way, there are easier methods than public humiliation. Poison, an accident, a staged attack. But if someone wanted to damage the Emperor without openly committing treason, this is how you do it. You make him look weak, reckless, distracted by a woman while the Empire suffers. So you think this was an attack on him? I think, Seraphina said, folding the paper, that it doesn't matter. What matters is what we do next. Mira's eyes widened. We? Seraphina stood, walked to the fireplace, held the letter from the banquet in her hand, the one she'd quietly slipped into her sleeve when no one was looking. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she placed it in a drawer. Not the fire. Not yet. You're going to help me, Seraphina said, turning back to Mira. And you're not going to tell anyone. Not the other ladies. Not your family. No one. Mira swallowed hard. Help you do what, Your Majesty? Seraphina's smile returned, that cold, sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. Win. The next morning, the palace woke to find Empress Seraphina attending her usual duties as if nothing had happened. She met with the Minister of Treasury to discuss grain distribution, reviewed petitions from provincial governors, held court for 2 hours, listening to disputes between noble houses, her face calm, her judgments fair and sharp. She didn't mention the letter. She didn't mention Lucien. She didn't mention Lady Isolde Varn, who had apparently locked herself in her chambers and refused to come out. The court didn't know what to do with this. Scandal was supposed to be loud. It was supposed to involve shouting and broken dishes and dramatic confrontations in hallways. It was supposed to give them something to gossip about, something to pick apart and analyze and use as currency in their endless games of social warfare. But Seraphina gave them nothing, and so the silence grew. It spread through this palace like frost, creeping into every corner, making people uneasy in ways they couldn't articulate. Servants whispered in the kitchens. Guards exchanged glances at their posts. Even the ministers, men who'd spent decades navigating court politics, seemed off balance, because they'd all seen this before. They'd seen emperors fall, queens disposed, favorites destroyed, but they'd never seen an empress go quiet, and that quiet felt like a held breath before a storm. By midday, Seraphina received a message. It came via one of the palace runners, a young woman who approached with her head down and her hands shaking slightly. She held out a folded piece of paper sealed with black wax. Serafina took it, dismissed the girl, broke the seal. Inside, in handwriting she hadn't seen in 4 years, were 6 words. I heard. Do you need me? No signature, no title. But Serafina knew exactly who it was from. General Cassian Ward. The man Lucien had exiled for treason after he'd stood before the entire war council and called the emperor a coward for abandoning the eastern border troops to die while he threw festivals in the capital. The man who'd been stripped of his rank, his lands, his titles, and sent to rot in the northern territories with nothing but his reputation and his rage. The man who, once upon a time, had been Serafina's closest friend. She stared at the letter for a long time. Then she walked to her desk, wrote a single line on a fresh sheet of paper, sealed it, and handed it to Mira. Send this to the north, she said. Use a private courier. No imperial messengers. Mira glanced at the seal. What does it say? Serafina's smile was soft, almost fond. It says, not yet, but soon. 3 days passed. The court remained in chaos. Nobles who had once ignored Serafina now watched her like hawks, trying to decipher her next move. Lucien held multiple closed-door meetings with his ministers, his voice rising behind the heavy doors, though no one could make out the words. Lady Isolde Varn finally emerged from her chambers, pale and red-eyed, and immediately requested permission to return to her family's estate. Permission was denied, not by the emperor, by the empress. Serafina delivered the refusal herself, in a private audience that lasted less than 5 minutes. Lady Isolde stood in the center of Serafina's sitting room, trembling, her hands twisting in the fabric of her skirt. Your Majesty, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. Serafina sat in a high-backed chair near the window, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She let the girl squirm. Finally, she spoke. You didn't want to hurt me, but you fucked my husband anyway. Isolde's face went white. Your Majesty, I don't, Serafina said, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. Don't insult me with excuses. You knew what you were doing. You knew who he was. And you did it because you thought the reward was worth the risk. Isolde's lip trembled. She looked like she might cry. Serafina didn't care. You'll stay at court, Serafina continued. You'll continue your duties as a lady of the household. You'll attend every banquet, every gathering, every public event, and you'll smile. Isolde's breath hitched. Why? Because, Serafina said, standing, walking slowly toward the girl until they were inches apart, I want everyone to see you. I want them to watch you every single day and wonder what I'm going to do to you. I want you to wake up every morning not knowing if today is the day your life ends. Isolde's eyes filled with tears. Serafina leaned in close, whispered, And I want my husband to see you and remember what it cost to underestimate me. She stepped back, smiled. You're dismissed. Isolde fled. That night, Serafina received another message. This one came from an unexpected source. Lord Cale Dorian, the Minister of Trade, a man who'd always been firmly in Lucien's camp. The message was brief. We should speak, privately. There are things you need to know. Serafina burned the letter. Then she sent a reply. Tomorrow, midnight, the East Garden. When midnight came, she went alone. The East Garden was a sprawling maze of hedges and stone pathways, lit only by the moon and a few scattered lanterns. It was far enough from the main palace that sound didn't carry, and private enough that people rarely wandered through it after dark. Serafina waited by the fountain in the center, her cloak pulled tight against the night chill. Lord Dorian appeared exactly on time. He was a tall man, sharp-featured, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that always looked like they were calculating something. He'd served Lucien for a decade, climbed the ranks through a combination of intelligence and ruthlessness, and never once shown loyalty to anyone but himself, which made this meeting either very useful or very dangerous. Your Majesty, he said, bowing. Serafina didn't return the gesture. You said there are things I need to know. Dorian glanced around, confirming they were alone, then stepped closer. The Emperor's mistress isn't the problem, he said quietly. She's a symptom. Serafina's eyes narrowed. Explain. Dorian pulled a folded stack of papers from his coat. For the past 2 years, funds have been disappearing from the imperial treasury. Small amounts at first, then larger. The records are clean on the surface, but if you dig deeper, the numbers don't match. Serafina took the papers, scanned them, her breath stilled. How much? Conservatively, Dorian said. 500,000 gold marks. Serafina's hands tightened on the papers. And you're telling me this why? Because, Dorian said, whoever's stealing it has friends in very high places. Friends who've been covering the trail. Friends who've been using Lady Isolde as a distraction to keep the Emperor occupied. Serafina looked up sharply. You think Lucien knows? Dorian hesitated, then, I think he's involved. The words hung in the air like smoke. Serafina folded the papers carefully, slipped them into her cloak. Why come to me? She asked. You've served him for years. Dorian's jaw tightened. Because the Empire is falling apart while he plays king, and I'd rather serve a ruler who actually gives a damn. Serafina studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll need names, she said. Every official involved, every transaction, every lie. Dorian smiled faintly. I already have them. Good. Serafina turned to leave, then paused. And Lord Dorian? Yes, Your Majesty? If you're lying to me, I'll make sure you die screaming. Dorian's smile didn't waver. I'd expect nothing less. Serafina walked back through the garden, the papers heavy in her cloak, her mind already racing. This was bigger than an affair, bigger than embarrassment. This was treason, corruption, the kind of rot that could topple an empire if left unchecked, and Lucien was at the center of it. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her desk, reading through every document Dorian had given her, cross-referencing names, dates, amounts. Mira brought her tea. Serafina didn't drink it. By dawn, she had a list. 12 names. 12 nobles, ministers, and officials who'd been bleeding the empire dry while Lucien either helped or looked the other way. And at the top of the list, written in Dorian's careful hand, was a note. The Moon Festival. They're planning something during the Moon Festival. Serafina leaned back in her chair. The Moon Festival was in 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks to gather allies, evidence, leverage. 2 weeks to make sure that when Lucien made his next move, she'd be 3 steps ahead. She stood, walked to the window, watched the sun rise over the imperial capital, painting the rooftops gold. Somewhere in the palace, Lucien was waking up, confident he'd survived the worst of the scandal. Somewhere in the East Wing, Lady Isolde was probably still crying. And somewhere in the Northern Territories, General Cassian Ward was reading her letter and sharpening his sword. Serafina smiled. Let them all think the storm had passed. Let them all believe the Empress had swallowed her pride and moved on. Because when the Moon Festival came, when Lucien stood before the court and made his grand announcement, when he tried to elevate his mistress and humiliate Serafina one final time, that's when the real reckoning would begin. The morning after her midnight meeting with Lord Dorian, Serafina woke before dawn and did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the training yard. Not the public one where guards drilled and nobles practiced their ornamental swordplay. The old one, tucked behind the servants' quarters, where the stones were cracked and the weapons were real. And nobody bothered to clean the blood off the practice dummies. She wore plain clothes. No silk. No jewels. Just dark wool and boots that didn't echo. The yard was empty except for a single figure running drills in the corner. Mira. Her lady-in-waiting moved through the forms with brutal efficiency, a short blade flashing in the pre-dawn light. Strike, pivot, throat cut, gut slash. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Serafina watched from the doorway until Mira finished the sequence and turned. Their eyes met. Mira didn't look surprised. Your Majesty, she said, lowering the blade. Serafina stepped into the yard. When did you learn to fight? Mira wiped sweat from her face. Before I came to court, my father believed daughters should know how to protect themselves. Smart man. He was a soldier. Died protecting a village from raiders when I was 15. Serafina picked up a practice blade from the rack, tested the weight, and you kept training, every morning for 10 years. Why? Mira's jaw tightened. Because I watched my mother get dragged into the woods after my father fell. I swore I'd never be helpless like that again. Serafina nodded slowly. Then she raised the blade. Show me. Mira blinked. Your Majesty? Show me what you know. For a moment Mira hesitated, then she moved. Fast. The blade came in low, testing, probing for weakness. Serafina blocked. Barely. The impact rattled her wrist. She'd trained once, years ago, before marriage had made her soft and careful and afraid to bruise. But muscle remembered. She pushed back. Mira spun. They circled each other in the gray light, breath misting, boots scraping stone. Another strike, another block. Serafina's arms burned, her lungs ached. She felt sweat trickle down her spine, felt her heart slam against her ribs, felt something cold and sharp unfold in her chest. Control. Not over Mira, over herself, over the rage that had been sitting in her throat since the letter fell. She struck hard. Mira parried, the blades locked. They stood face to face, both breathing hard. Why are you doing this? Mira asked quietly. Because, Serafina said, the Empress everyone knows doesn't exist anymore, and the woman who's left needs to remember how to bleed. She stepped back, lowered her blade. Mira stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. They trained for an hour. By the time the sun cleared the eastern wall, Serafina's hands were blistered and her shoulders screamed, and she felt more awake than she had in 17 years. She returned to her chambers, bathed, dressed, put the Empress mask back on like armor. Then she went to work. The first meeting was with the Minister of Agriculture. Lord Hemming was a broad man with kind eyes and dirt still under his fingernails from inspecting the palace gardens. He'd served 3 emperors and never asked for more than he earned. He was also one of the 12 names on Dorian's list. Serafina received him in her private study, a small room lined with books and maps. She sat behind her desk. He stood. Lord Hemming, she said, smiling warmly. Thank you for coming. Of course, Your Majesty. He shifted his weight. I heard about the incident at the banquet. I wanted to express I need grain shipments redirected, Serafina interrupted smoothly. Hemming blinked. Your Majesty? The northern provinces. They're starving. I've reviewed the reports. 3 failed harvests, no imperial relief. I want wagons sent within the week. Hemming's face went carefully blank. Your Majesty, those shipments were allocated for the Moon Festival. The Emperor specifically ordered. I'm ordering otherwise. The silence stretched. Hemming cleared his throat. With respect, Your Majesty, such changes require the Emperor's approval. Serafina leaned forward. Do they? It was a challenge. Quiet. Undeniable. Hemming's jaw worked. Then, carefully, the chain of command is about to change, Serafina said. So I suggest you decide which side you want to be on when it does. Hemming stared at her. She watched him calculate, watched the fear creep into his eyes. Finally, he bowed. I'll arrange the shipments. Good. Serafina pulled out a ledger, slid it across the desk. And while you're at it, explain these numbers. Hemming went pale. The ledger showed 3 years of grain purchases. Prices inflated. Quantities reduced. The difference pocketed by someone clever enough to bury the discrepancies in footnotes and seasonal variations. Someone like Hemming. Your Majesty, I can explain. Can you? It's not what it looks like. Serafina smiled. It looks like theft. Treason. Enough to have you hanged in the public square while your family watches. Hemming's hand shook. Please, Your Majesty, I have children. So do the farmers starving in the north. She let that sit. Hemming's breathing quickened. Sweat darkened his collar. Finally, Serafina spoke again. I'm going to give you a choice, Lord Hemming. You can confess everything, names, dates, transactions, everyone involved. And in exchange, I'll make sure your children are cared for after you're executed. Hemming made a choking sound. Or, Serafina continued, you can work for me. You'll testify when I need you. Provide evidence. Help me dismantle every corrupt bastard bleeding this empire dry. And maybe, just maybe, you'll keep your head. The room was silent except for Hemming's ragged breathing. He looked at the ledger, at Serafina, at the door like he was considering running. Then he collapsed into the chair across from her. I'll testify, he whispered. I'll tell you everything. Good. Serafina pulled out fresh parchment. Start talking. He did. For 2 hours, Lord Hemming laid out the entire scheme. How the network operated, who took what, how they covered their tracks. He named names Serafina already had, and names she didn't. Merchants, lesser nobles, 2 generals, a judge. And he confirmed what Dorian had said. The Emperor knew. Maybe not every detail, maybe he looked the other way on purpose, or maybe he was just too distracted by his mistress to notice. But he'd signed the orders, approved the budgets, collected his share. By the time Hemming finished, his voice was hoarse and his face was gray. Serafina set down her pen. "You'll stay at court," she said. "Act normal. If anyone asks, this meeting was about crop rotation. Understand?" Hemming nodded weakly. "And Hemming," he looked up, "if you run, I'll find you, and I'll make sure your children watch what happens next." Hemming's face crumpled. He nodded again. "Dismissed." He left like a man walking to his own grave. Serafina sat alone in the study, staring at the pages of testimony. 1 down, 11 to go. But she didn't have time to work through them one by one. The Moon Festival was 12 days away. She needed something bigger, something that would force the others to move first. She needed pressure. That afternoon, Serafina did something no empress had done in living memory. She held open court, not for nobles, for commoners. The announcement spread through the capital like wildfire. By midday, the palace gates were crowded with farmers, merchants, laborers, mothers with sick children, veterans missing limbs, all of them clutching petitions and desperate hope. The royal guard tried to turn them away. Serafina overruled them personally. "Let them in," she said, standing at the top of the palace steps. "All of them." The guards hesitated. Serafina's voice cut like a whip. "That's an order." They obeyed. For 6 hours, Serafina sat on the throne in the Hall of Petitions and listened. She listened to stories about taxmen taking more than the law allowed, about soldiers stealing livestock, about grain shipments that never arrived, about children dying because medicine was too expensive and the hospitals were empty. She listened to every single one, and she took notes. By the time the sun set, she had a list of grievances longer than her arm, and a crowd of commoners who looked at her like she was the first person in power who'd ever given a damn. The nobles were horrified. Lord Varen cornered her after court ended, his face red, his voice tight with outrage. "Your Majesty, this is unprecedented, dangerous. You've given the rabble direct access to the throne. They'll expect this now. They'll demand—" "Good," Serafina said. "Let them demand. You're undermining the Emperor's authority." "Am I?" Varen sputtered. "His Majesty will hear about this. I'm counting on it." She walked away, leaving him choking on his own indignation. That night, Lucius summoned her, not to his chambers, to the throne room. A power move. A reminder that he was still emperor, still in control, still the one who held the crown. Serafina arrived exactly on time. Lucien sat on the throne, surrounded by 6 of his closest ministers, all men, all loyal to him. The room was lit by torches, shadows dancing on the marble columns. Serafina walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing. She stopped at the base of the steps. Didn't bow. Lucien's eyes narrowed. "You held court without my permission," he said. "I held court because our people are suffering," Serafina replied calmly. "Our people," Lucien repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "You mean the peasants you let swarm the palace like locusts. I mean the citizens you've been bleeding dry while you fuck your way through the court." Gasps echoed through the room. One of the ministers, Lord Karth, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, you will not speak to the Emperor." "I'll speak however I want," Serafina said, her voice ice. "Because unlike the rest of you, I don't have my head shoved so far up his ass that I've forgotten what a spine looks like." Karth went red. Lucien raised a hand, silencing him. The Emperor stood, descended the steps slowly, stopped in front of Serafina. They were the same height, eye to eye. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Am I? You're turning the court against me. I'm showing them who you really are." Lucien's jaw tightened. "And what is that?" "A coward," Serafina said. "A thief. A man who hides behind ceremony while his empire rots." Lucien's hand shot out, grabbed her arm. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "Careful, wife." Serafina didn't flinch. "Or what? You'll have me killed. Exiled, locked away like everyone else who's inconvenient. Lucian's eyes glittered. Maybe. Then do it, Serafina whispered. Make me a martyr. See what happens when the people find out you murdered the only one trying to help them. Lucian's grip tightened, then released. He stepped back. You have until the moon festival, he said. After that, this ends, one way or another. Serafina smiled, looking forward to it. She turned and walked out, her arm throbbing, her heart pounding, her spine straight. Behind her, she heard Lucien speak to his ministers. Find out who she's been meeting with, who she's talking to. I want every move she makes reported to me. The doors closed. Serafina kept walking. 8 days until the moon festival. She spent them building her case. Every morning she met with Lord Dorian in secret. He brought her documents, witness statements, confessions. The evidence piled up like kindling. Every afternoon she held open court again. More commoners, more stories, more names added to her list. Every evening she trained with Mira. Her body hardened. Her hands stopped blistering. The blade felt less like a foreign object and more like an extension of her will. And every night she wrote letters. Some went north to General Cassian. Updates, warnings, requests for troop movements that looked routine but weren't. Some went to nobles she thought might turn, carefully worded, offering protection, hinting at evidence she didn't have yet. Some went to merchants and guild leaders, reminders that the Empress remembered them, that she was watching, that change was coming. She slept 3 hours a night. On the 5th day, Lady Isolde tried to run. She made it as far as the eastern gate before the guards caught her. They dragged her back to the palace, screaming, makeup smeared, dress torn. Serafina was in a council meeting when she heard. She excused herself, walked to the holding cell where they'd put Isolde, dismissed the guards. Isolde sat on the floor, hugging her knees, sobbing. Serafina stood in the doorway. Why did you run? Isolde's head snapped up. Her eyes were wild. Because you're going to kill me. Everyone knows it. They're taking bets on how you'll do it. Serafina tilted her head. And you thought running would help. I thought. Isolde's voice cracked. I thought maybe if I got far enough away, you'd forget about me. Serafina stepped into the cell, crouched down so they were eye level. I'm not going to kill you, she said softly. Isolde blinked. You're not? No. Serafina's smile was cold. You're going to do exactly what I say, and if you obey, you might survive this. Isolde stared at her. What do you want? The moon festival, Serafina said. The Emperor is going to announce something. I need you to be there. Standing beside him, smiling. Why? Because, Serafina said, when everything falls apart, I need people to see you. I need them to remember that you were part of this, that you stood with him while he destroyed everything. Isolde's face went pale. You're using me. Serafina stood. Everyone's using you, girl. I'm just the only one being honest about it. She walked to the door, paused. And Isolde, if you try to run again, I won't bring you back. I'll let you go. And then I'll make sure everyone knows you were a spy, that you sold Imperial secrets. The Empire doesn't forgive traitors. They'll hunt you down and gut you in whatever slum you crawl into. Isolde made a small, broken sound. Serafina left. On the 7th day, Lord Dorian brought her the final piece. Shipping manifests. Signed orders. Correspondence between the Emperor and a syndicate operating out of the eastern ports. They'd been selling Imperial grain to foreign buyers at triple the price while the northern provinces starved. Lucien's signature was on every document. Serafina spread the papers across her desk, stared at them until the words blurred. This was it. Proof of treason, enough to bring him down, enough to destroy him. But it had to be done right. Public. Undeniable. Witnessed by everyone who mattered. The Moon Festival. She looked up at Dorian. Can you get these into the Grand Hall, displayed where everyone can see them? Dorian smiled grimly. I can do better than that. I can get them read aloud. By who? By me. I'll present them as new evidence during the ceremony. The Emperor won't see it coming. And after, Dorian said, you'll need soldiers you can trust, because once this goes public, his loyalists will move fast. Serafina nodded. I'm working on it. That night she received a message from the north. 3 words in Cassian's handwriting. Troops are ready. Serafina burned the letter, watched the paper curl and blacken in the flame. 2 days until the moon festival. The palace buzzed with preparation. Servants hung lanterns. Cooks prepared feasts. Musicians rehearsed. Nobles arrived from across the empire, their carriages clogging the streets, their entourages filling every available room. And in the center of it all, Lucian smiled. He hosted dinners, shook hands, played the gracious emperor. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who'd already won. Serafina watched him from across the banquet hall. He had no idea. On the morning of the festival, Serafina dressed in white, not the soft, passive white of a bride, the hard, cold white of winter, of bone, of something that had been buried and clawed its way back out. Mira helped her into the gown. It was simple, elegant, unadorned. No jewels, no crown, just the empress. "You're ready," Mira said quietly. Serafina looked at herself in the mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. This woman had edges, scars, eyes that didn't look away. "I am," she said. The festival began at sunset. The grand hall was packed. Nobles, ministers, foreign dignitaries, all of them dressed in silk and gold, all of them drunk on wine and gossip and the promise of spectacle. The emperor sat on his throne, Lady Isolde standing just behind him, pale and trembling. Serafina entered alone. The crowd parted. She walked down the center aisle, her white gown stark against the red carpets, her face calm, her heartbeat steady. She took her place beside the throne. Lucien glanced at her. His smile was thin, cold. "Lovely dress," he murmured. "Thank you." The ceremony began. Ministers gave speeches, musicians played, dancers performed. The crowd drank and laughed and clapped at all the right moments. And then Lucian stood. The hall fell silent. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "I have an announcement." Serafina's pulse quickened. Lucien gestured to Isolde. "Bring her forward." Isolde stepped into the light, her hand shaking. Lucien took her hand, raised it. "This woman," he said, "has brought me joy in a time of great burden. And so, I have decided to honor her. From this day forward, Lady Isolde Varn will hold the title of Imperial Consort with all rights and privileges." Lord Dorian stepped forward from the crowd. "Your Majesty," he said loudly, "I must interrupt." The hall erupted in murmurs. Lucian's face darkened. "This better be important, Dorian." Dorian held up a stack of papers. "It is. These documents detail 3 years of grain theft, illegal trade agreements, and misappropriated funds totaling over 500,000 gold marks. All signed by you." The hall went silent. Lucien stared. "That's a lie." "It's not." Dorian's voice was steady. "I have witnesses, testimony, ledgers, and I'm prepared to present all of it to the Royal Council." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Arrest him." The guards hesitated. "Arrest him!" Lucian roared. They moved toward Dorian, and then the doors burst open. General Cassian Ward strode into the hall, flanked by 50 soldiers in full armor. The entire room froze. Cassian stopped in front of the throne, looked up at Lucian. "Stand down, Emperor. This is over." Lucien's face went white, and Serafina finally spoke. "No," she said softly, "it's just beginning." The sound of 50 armored soldiers marching into the grand hall should have been Serafina's victory anthem. Instead, it was the first crack in ice she hadn't known was beneath her feet. General Cassian Ward stood at the head of his troops, his face carved from stone, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Behind him, the soldiers fanned out in perfect formation, blocking every exit. The nobles closest to the doors stumbled backward, wine sloshing from their goblets, their faces shifting from shock to terror. Lucien remained frozen on his throne, his hand still gripping Lady Isolde's wrist. The girl looked like she might faint. Lord Dorian stood in the center of the hall, the stolen documents clutched against his chest, his eyes locked on Cassian with something that looked almost like relief. And Serafina felt her pulse hammer in her throat because something was wrong. Cassian's eyes swept the room, found hers, and didn't soften. "Stand down, Emperor," Cassian repeated, his voice carrying across the sudden, suffocating silence. "This is over." Lucien finally moved. He released Isolde and rose to his full height, his face bloodless but his voice steady. You dare bring armed men into my hall, Ward. I exiled you, stripped you of rank. You have no authority here. I have the authority of 30,000 soldiers camped outside your walls, Cassian said, and the backing of every lord whose lands you bled dry while you played king. The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles shouting, guards reaching for weapons, ministers scrambling toward the exits, only to find soldiers blocking their path. Seraphina's mind raced. This was the plan. This was exactly what she'd orchestrated. Cassian arrives with troops. Dorian presents evidence. Lucien falls. So why did Cassian's eyes feel like ice when they landed on her? Your Majesty, Cassian said, and the title sounded wrong in his mouth. Step away from the throne. Seraphina blinked. What? Step away from the throne, Cassian repeated, louder now. You're under arrest. The world tilted. Seraphina heard the words, but they didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her brain refused to process what was happening. On what grounds, she said, and her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Treason, Cassian said flatly. Conspiracy to overthrow the emperor, theft of imperial documents, unlawful imprisonment, and sedition. Every word landed like a blade between her ribs. Seraphina stared at him, at the man she'd trusted, the man she'd sent letters to, the man who'd written back with 3 words, "Troops are ready." Cassian, she said quietly, what are you doing? My duty, he said. And then Lord Dorian stepped forward. He walked past Seraphina without looking at her, climbed the steps, handed the documents not to the crowd, not to the council, but directly to Lucien. The emperor took them, scanned the pages, and smiled. It was the coldest smile Seraphina had ever seen. Excellent work, Lord Dorian, Lucien said. These forgeries are very convincing. Forgeries. The word hit Seraphina like a fist. Dorian bowed. Thank you, Your Majesty. The Empress was quite thorough in her attempts to manufacture evidence against you, but fortunately, General Ward brought these to my attention before any real damage could be done. Seraphina's breath stopped. No. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She'd been so careful. She'd verified every document, cross-referenced every name. Lord Hemming had confessed. The ledgers were real. The shipping manifests were signed, weren't they? Her mind spun back through the past 8 days. Every meeting with Dorian, every document he'd handed her, every witness statement, every confession. He'd given her everything, and none of it was real. You played me, she whispered. Dorian finally looked at her. His face was calm, almost pitying. You made it easy, Your Majesty, a scorned wife desperate for revenge. All I had to do was give you what you wanted to believe. Seraphina's hands started shaking. Lord Hemming, the confession was scripted, Dorian said. Hemming's a drunk and a coward. Tell him his children will die and he'll say anything you want. The grain shipments, the theft, exaggerated, manipulated. Enough truth to make the lies taste real. Seraphina looked at Cassian. And you. Cassian's jaw tightened. I never agreed to treason, Seraphina. You asked me to bring troops to the capital. You said you needed protection. I thought you were in danger. I was, she said, her voice cracking. From him. She pointed at Lucien. Cassian shook his head slowly. You tried to stage a coup. You forged documents. You manipulated commoners into turning against their emperor. You used me. I trusted you. And I trusted you, Cassian said. I thought you wanted to fix the empire, not burn it down because your husband fucked someone younger. The words sliced through her like broken glass. Seraphina felt something inside her chest collapse. Something vital and structural. The thing that had been holding her together for 8 days, for 17 years, for her entire life as empress. It shattered, and beneath it was nothing but rage, pure, molten, annihilating. She turned to Lucien. He was still smiling. Well played, wife, he said softly. You almost had me worried. Seraphina's vision blurred red. You lying bastard! You're stealing from your own people. You're letting them starve while you throw festivals and fuck children. Careful, Lucien said. You're already facing execution. Don't make this harder on yourself. Harder on myself, Seraphina repeated. She laughed. It sounded insane even to her own ears. You destroyed this empire. You destroyed us. And now you're going to pretend I'm the villain. You tried to overthrow me. Because you deserved it. Lucienne stood, descended the steps, stopped in front of her. They were eye to eye again, just like the night he'd grabbed her arm. Deserved, he said quietly. You think you know what I deserve. You think you understand power. But you don't. You never did. He leaned closer. Power isn't about being right, Serafina. It's about being believed. And right now, everyone in this room believes you're a traitor. Serafina's hands curled into fists. Then execute me. Do it. Right here. Right now. Let them watch. Lucienne smiled. Oh, I will. But not yet. He turned to Cassian. Take her to the North Tower. Lock her in the same cell I used for the last empress who forgot her place. Cassian hesitated. Your Majesty, perhaps. Now, General. Cassian's face hardened. He gestured to two of his soldiers. They moved towards Serafina, and Mira stepped between them. She'd been so still, so silent in the chaos that Serafina had almost forgotten she was there. But now she stood in front of her empress, her hand on the blade hidden beneath her skirts, her eyes cold and calculating. Move, one of the soldiers said. Mira didn't move. The soldier reached for her. Mira's blade flashed. She opened his throat before he could scream. Blood sprayed across the white marble. The hall erupted into screams. Mira spun. The second soldier lunged. She ducked under his swing, drove her blade into his ribs, ripped it free. He collapsed. Cassian drew his sword. Mira. Mira's eyes locked on his. She was breathing hard, blood splattered across her face, her hands steady. You're making a mistake, she said. Stand down, Cassian ordered. Mira smiled. It was terrible, broken. I watched my mother die because men like you chose duty over decency. I'm not standing down. She turned to Serafina. Run! Serafina stared at her. Mira, no, run! Mira screamed. And then she charged, straight at Cassian. Blade high, eyes wild. Cassian's sword came up. Their blades met with a sound like thunder. Serafina ran. She didn't think, didn't plan. Her body just moved. She shoved through the crowd, nobles scattering like startled birds, wine and glass shattering underfoot. Behind her, steel clashed against steel. Mira was buying her seconds. Maybe a minute. Not enough. Never enough. Serafina reached the side exit, slammed through the door into a narrow corridor lit by flickering torches. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her white dress was already filthy, trailing blood from the hall. She heard shouts, footsteps, soldiers mobilizing. She ran faster. The corridor branched. Left led to the main palace. Right led to the servants' quarters. She went right, dove into the maze of narrow passages and steep staircases that the nobles never saw. The hidden arteries of the palace where cooks and maids and cleaners moved unseen. She knew these halls. She'd walked them years ago when she was still a princess learning how empires actually functioned. Before the crown, before Lucienne, before everything. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. She kept moving. She burst into the kitchens. A dozen servants looked up from their work, startled. Serafina grabbed a cloak hanging by the door, threw it over her shoulders. Say nothing, she gasped. A young girl, maybe 14, with flour on her hands, stared at her wide-eyed. Your Majesty? Serafina met her eyes. Please. The girl looked at the blood on Serafina's dress, looked at the soldiers she could probably hear in the distance. Then she pointed to a door in the back corner. Leads to the lower city, gates usually unguarded. Serafina's throat tightened. Thank you, she ran. Through the door. Down another staircase, this one steep and dark and smelling of rot. Into a tunnel that ran beneath the palace walls, water dripping from the ceiling, rats scattering at her approach. She emerged in an alley choked with garbage and shadows. The lower city. The part of the capital where the poor lived and died, and no one with power ever looked twice. Serafina pulled the cloak tight and forced herself to walk, not run. Running attracted attention. The streets were crowded despite the late hour. Drunks stumbling between taverns. Beggars huddled in doorways. Street vendors selling questionable meat on sticks. No one looked at her twice. She kept her head down and moved. Her mind spun. She needed a plan. Needed allies. Needed something. But everyone she'd trusted had either betrayed her or was dead. Dorian was Lucien's creature. Cassian had chosen duty. Mira was probably bleeding out on the floor of the Grand Hall. She had nothing. No power. No protection. No proof. Just the clothes on her back and the truth rotting in her chest. She ducked into a shadowed alcove between two buildings, pressed her back against the cold stone, tried to breathe. The world was spinning too fast. Nothing made sense. How had Dorian known? How had Lucian set this up? How long had they been planning this? And then she remembered. The letter. The first letter. The one that had started everything. The one that fell during the banquet. It had been too convenient, too public, too perfectly timed to humiliate her in front of the entire court. They'd wanted her to react, wanted her to lash out, wanted her angry and desperate and stupid, and she'd given them exactly what they wanted. Seraphina's breath hitched. She'd thought she was 3 steps ahead. She'd been 10 steps behind the entire time. Footsteps echoed nearby. Soldiers, searching. Seraphina pushed deeper into the shadows. Her hand touched something wet and warm. She looked down. A body. Slumped against the wall, throat slit, still bleeding, fresh. She jerked back, hit the opposite wall. Her heart hammered, and then a voice spoke from the darkness above her. "Not the best hiding spot, Your Majesty." Seraphina's head snapped up. A figure crouched on the rooftop ledge, silhouetted against the moon. Small, lean, dangerous. The figure dropped, landed in front of her without a sound. A woman. Maybe 30. Dark hair cropped short, scars on her face, eyes like broken glass. She held a blade, still wet. Seraphina's hand went to her waist. She had no weapon, nothing. The woman tilted her head. "You killed my friend." "I don't know you," Seraphina said, her voice shaking. "No," the woman agreed, "but you signed the order that got her hanged 2 years ago. Theft of imperial grain. She was stealing to feed her children." Seraphina's stomach twisted. "I sign hundreds of orders. I can't remember," the woman finished. "Of course. Why would you? We're just bodies to people like you." She stepped closer. Seraphina pressed back against the wall. There was nowhere to go. "You're right," Seraphina said. "I can't remember. I'm sorry." "Sorry," the woman repeated. She laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. "You think sorry fixes anything?" "No," Seraphina said, "but it's all I have left." The woman stopped, stared at her, then lowered the blade. "You're running," she said. "Yes. From the Emperor. Yes. Why?" "Because I tried to destroy him and failed." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You tried to destroy the Emperor. Yes. Why?" Seraphina's voice cracked. "Because he's rotting this empire from the inside and no one else will stop him." Silence. The woman studied her, looked at the blood on her dress, the cloak, the desperation in her eyes. Then she sheathed her blade. "Come with me," she said. Seraphina blinked. "What?" "You want to destroy the Emperor. So do we. Come with me." "Who's we?" The woman smiled. It was sharp, feral. "The people you've been pretending don't exist." She turned and walked deeper into the alley. Seraphina hesitated, then followed. Because what else was she going to do? The woman led her through a maze of back streets and crumbling buildings, down into the bowels of the lower city where even the criminals didn't go, through a door hidden behind a pile of rubble, into a chamber carved out of the earth itself. It was filled with people, dozens of them, maybe 100, men and women, young and old, all of them scarred, all of them armed, all of them staring at her. The woman walked to the center of the room. "This is Empress Seraphina Vale," she announced. "The woman who signed the orders that killed our families. The woman who sat on a throne while we starved." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, angry, hostile. Seraphina's hands trembled. The woman turned to her. "Tell them why you're here." Seraphina looked at the faces surrounding her, faces full of hate, faces that had every reason to kill her, and she realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't the Empress anymore. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't untouchable. She was just a woman who'd failed, a woman who'd been played, a woman who had nothing left but the truth. So she told them. She told them about Lucien, about the corruption, about the stolen grain and the dead children and the empire bleeding out while the court danced. She told them about Dorian's betrayal, about Cassian's choice, about Mira's sacrifice. She told them everything. And when she finished, the chamber was silent. Then a man stepped forward, older, missing an eye. His voice was gravel. "Why should we believe you?" Seraphina met his gaze. "Because I have nothing left to gain by lying. And because whether you believe me or not, Lucien will come for you next. He's consolidating power, eliminating threats. You think he'll let you keep existing down here once I'm dead?" The man's jaw tightened. Another voice spoke, a woman with burns covering half her face. "What do you want from us?" Seraphina took a breath. "Help me take him down, for real this time. No more games, no more manipulation, just truth, witnesses, evidence that can't be forged." "And why would we risk that?" the burned woman asked. "We're already hunted, already dying. Why throw our lives away for your revenge?" "It's not revenge," Seraphina said. "It's survival. If he wins, you all die anyway. But if we win, you get a voice, a chance, a future that isn't this." She gestured at the dirt walls, the weapons, the desperation soaked into every corner. "I can't give you back what you lost," Seraphina said. "I can't undo the orders I signed or the lives I destroyed. But I can make sure no one else suffers the way you have, and I will, if you help me." The chamber remained silent. Then the woman who'd brought her here spoke. "Her name's Kira, by the way. And she's right. The Emperor's planning a purge. My contacts in the Guard confirmed it. He's going to blame the Empress's treason on outside agitators, use it as an excuse to cleanse the lower city." Gasps, curses. "We're dead either way," Kira continued. "But if we act now, we might take him down with us." The man with the missing eye looked at Seraphina. "What's your plan?" Seraphina's mind raced. She had no plan, no resources, no allies, except the people who hated her most. But she'd learned something in the past 8 days. Plans could be manipulated, trust could be weaponized, power could be stolen. The only thing that couldn't be faked was truth witnessed by enough people that it couldn't be buried. "The Moon Festival," she said. "It's still happening. Lucien will use it to announce my execution, to solidify his story, to make himself the hero." "So what?" Kira said. "So we crash it," Seraphina said. "We bring every witness who's been silenced, every victim who's been ignored. We make them see. Not documents, not testimony, real people, real suffering. We force the truth into the light where he can't spin it." "That's suicide," someone muttered. "Probably," Seraphina agreed. "But it's also the only shot we have." Silence. Then the burned woman laughed. It was harsh, humorless. "The Empress wants to start a revolution with beggars and thieves." She looked around the room. "Anyone else think this is insane?" Every hand went up. "Good," the woman said. "Let's do it." And just like that, Seraphina had an army. Not soldiers, not nobles, not anyone with power, just the people the Empire had forgotten. The people she'd helped destroy. The people who might be the only ones left who could save it. They had 3 days to prepare for something that should have taken months. 3 days to transform a rabble of forgotten people into a force capable of storming the most heavily guarded palace in the Empire. 3 days before Lucien would stand before the court and announce Seraphina's execution as a traitor, cementing his version of history forever. 3 days to prove that power didn't flow from crowns or armies or carefully constructed lies. It flowed from the people brave enough to demand the truth. Seraphina stood in the center of the underground chamber, surrounded by faces that had spent years learning to hate everything she represented. She wore borrowed clothes now, rough wool that scratched her skin, boots 2 sizes too large. Her hair hung loose and tangled. No crown, no silk, no pretense. Just the woman beneath all of it. Kira had divided the group into teams. Scouts who knew every entrance to the palace. Fighters who'd survived street wars the nobles never heard about. Messengers who could move through the city unseen. And witnesses. 23 people who'd lost everything to imperial corruption and were willing to tell their stories in front of the entire court, if they survived long enough to speak. "We can't fight our way in," Kira said, unrolling a crude map of the palace across a wooden crate. "The guard will slaughter us before we reach the main hall. We need chaos, distraction, something that splits their attention." "Fire," someone suggested. "Too dangerous," Kira said. We start a fire and innocent people burn. We're not them. Serafina stared at the map. Her mind worked through possibilities. The palace had 3 main entrances, 24 smaller ones, guard rotations every 4 hours, emergency protocols for everything from assassinations to riots. She'd designed half of those protocols herself. The servants, she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. The Moon Festival, Serafina continued. They'll need 3 times the usual staff. Cooks, servers, cleaners. The palace will hire temporary workers from the lower city. They always do. Kira's eyes narrowed. You want us to infiltrate as servants. Not all of us. Just enough to open the right doors at the right time. The rest come in during the festival itself, when the gates are open for the public procession. There is no public procession, the burned woman said. Festivals are for nobles only. There will be this time, Serafina said. Lucien announced open gates 3 days ago. He's playing the magnanimous emperor, showing the people their traitorous empress being brought to justice. He'll let them watch. So we use his arrogance against him, Kira said slowly. Serafina nodded. We blend with the crowd, move through the palace while the guards are focused on security theater. And when Lucien brings me out to announce my execution, we bring out our witnesses, force him to face the truth in front of everyone. And if he just orders the guards to kill us all, the man with the missing eye asked. Then we die, Serafina said. But we die making sure the whole empire sees what he really is. Silence fell over the chamber. Then Kira smiled, that grim, feral smile that said she'd already made peace with death. I've had worse plans, she said. Let's get to work. The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of preparation and desperation. Serafina taught them everything she knew about palace security, guard shift changes, blind spots in patrol routes, which servants had access to which wings, how to move through the corridors without drawing attention, how to blend into a crowd of nobles without screaming that you didn't belong. In return, they taught her how to survive, how to wrap an injury so it didn't slow you down, how to move through shadows without making sound, how to read a room for threats, how to kill someone quickly if you had no choice. Skills no empress should need, skills that might keep her alive long enough to matter. On the second night, Kira found her alone in a corner, staring at a chipped knife someone had given her. You ever killed anyone? Kira asked. Serafina's throat tightened. I've signed execution orders. That's not the same. I know. Kira sat down beside her, handed her a whetstone. Here, your blade's dull. Won't do you any good like that. Serafina took the stone, started working the edge. The rhythm was strangely calming. Scrape, turn, scrape, turn. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. I destroyed your life, your friend's life. All of you have every reason to let me die. Kira was quiet for a long time. Then, because you're the first noble I've ever met who admitted it. Admitted what? That you fucked up, that the system's broken, that people like us exist. Most of your kind look right through us, but you looked at us and saw people. Too late, though, Serafina whispered. Yeah, Kira agreed. Too late, but better than never. She stood. Got some sleep, Your Majesty. Tomorrow's going to be hell. Don't call me that. Kira paused. What should I call you? Serafina, she said. Just Serafina. Kira nodded. Get some sleep, Serafina. But Serafina didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the underground, water dripping, voices murmuring, someone crying quietly in the corner. The weight of what they were about to attempt pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. They were going to die. Most of them. Maybe all of them. And it was her fault, not Lucien's, not Dorian's, not even Cassian's. Hers. Because she'd been so focused on revenge that she'd walked straight into a trap. Because she'd trusted the wrong people. Because she'd thought she could play the game better than men who'd spent their entire lives perfecting it. And now people who'd already lost everything were going to lose their lives. For her. For a cause that might not even matter. She pressed her hands against her eyes and tried not to scream. The morning of the Moon Festival dawned cold and gray. Serafina stood with the others as Kira laid out the final plan. 12 people would infiltrate as temporary servants. They'd been coached on how to act, what to say, how to avoid suspicion. Another 30 would enter with the public procession, hidden among the common citizens Lucien had magnanimously invited to witness justice. The witnesses would wait in the lower city until the signal. Then they'd be brought in through the servants' entrance Serafina had identified, the one that led directly to the corridor behind the grand hall. And Serafina herself would do the impossible. She'd walk through the front gate and surrender. "You're insane," Kier had said when Serafina first suggested it. "They'll kill you on sight." "Maybe," Serafina replied. "Or maybe Lucian will want to parade me in front of everyone first. Show them the traitor empress in chains. Make a spectacle of it. That's a hell of a gamble." Serafina smiled. It was a terrible smile. Everything about this is a gamble. So here she was, standing at the edge of the lower city, wearing the same blood-stained white dress she'd fled in. Hair tangled, face dirty, looking exactly like what Lucian wanted everyone to see. A broken woman. Defeated. Powerless. Kira handed her a thin blade, small enough to hide, just in case. Serafina tucked it into her sleeve. "If I don't make it," she said quietly, "finish this without me." Kira's jaw tightened. "You'll make it." Serafina didn't argue. They both knew the odds. She walked alone through the waking city. Citizens stared as she passed. Some recognized her. Gasps. Pointing. Whispers spreading like plague. The Empress. The traitor. Walking to her death. No one tried to stop her. By the time she reached the palace gates, a crowd had formed behind her. Hundreds of people following at a distance. Watching. Waiting. The guards at the gate saw her coming. Their hands went to their weapons. One of them shouted something. More guards appeared. 10. 20. Swords drawn. Serafina stopped 10 feet from the gate, raised her hands. "I'm here to face the Emperor," she called out. "No weapons, no tricks. I'm surrendering." The guards looked at each other, uncertain. Then Captain Vex pushed through the line. He was older, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much. He'd served the palace for 30 years. He'd also been kind to her once, years ago, when she was still new to the court and terrified of everything. "Your Majesty," he said quietly. "Captain, you shouldn't be here." "I know, but I am." Vex's face was stone. "He'll execute you." "Probably." "Then why?" "Because," Serafina said, meeting his eyes, "someone has to tell the truth, even if it kills them." Vex stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded to his men. "Take her, carefully. No violence unless she resists." The guards surrounded her, hands on her arms, her shoulders. Not rough. Not yet. But firm. Inescapable. They walked her through the gates. The crowd followed. And just like that, Serafina was back inside the palace that had been her prison for 17 years. They took her to a holding room. Small, stone, cold. A single chair bolted to the floor. She sat. Waited. The door opened an hour later. Lucien stepped inside. He looked immaculate. Pressed robes. Perfect hair. The crown sitting on his head like it had grown there. He studied her with the detached interest of someone examining an insect. "I have to admit," he said, closing the door behind him, "I didn't expect you to come back." "Where else would I go?" "Anywhere. The eastern provinces, across the sea. You had options." Serafina smiled faintly. "Running implies guilt." Lucien laughed. "You tried to overthrow me. That's textbook guilt." "I tried to save the empire from you." Lucien's laugh died. He stepped closer. "You tried to destroy me because I humiliated you. Don't dress it up as nobility." "You're stealing from your own people," Serafina said, "letting them starve while you throw parties. That's not humiliation. That's evil." "Evil," Lucien repeated. He crouched in front of her, looked her in the eyes. "Do you know what evil is, Serafina? Evil is watching your wife plot against you for 8 days and letting her think she's winning. Evil is turning every ally she makes into a weapon pointed back at her. Evil is making her believe she has a chance right up until the moment you rip it away." His smile was cold. "I didn't just beat you, I broke you. And now I'm going to parade you in front of the entire empire as a lesson. Cross the emperor and this is what happens." Serafina held his gaze. "You think you've won. I know I have. Then you're stupider than I thought." Lucien's hand shot out, grabbed her throat, squeezed. Serafina didn't fight, didn't flinch, just stared at him while her vision started to blur. After a moment, he released her. She gasped, coughed, tasted blood. Lucien stood. "The festival starts in an hour. I'll have you brought out at sunset. The people will watch, the nobles will cheer, and you'll die knowing you failed. He walked to the door, paused. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, you were a decent empress. Better than you should have been, but you forgot the most important rule. What's that? Power isn't about being good. It's about being strong. He left. Serafina sat in the silence, breathing hard, her throat aching, and she smiled, because Lucien had just confirmed everything she'd suspected. He was so confident he'd won that he didn't bother checking if she'd come alone. The festival began as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Music echoed through the palace. Nobles filled the grand hall in their finest silks and jewels. The smell of roasted meat and spiced wine drifted through the corridors. Lanterns flickered to life across the grounds, turning the palace into something out of a dream or a nightmare. In the holding room, Serafina heard footsteps. The door opened. 4 guards, Captain Vex leading them. Time to go, Your Majesty. She stood. Let them shackle her wrists. The chains were heavy, cold, real. They walked her through the palace. Servants stopped to stare. Nobles whispered behind fans. Everyone knew what was coming. The Empress was going to die. They reached the grand hall. The doors opened, and Serafina stepped into the light. The hall was packed. Hundreds of faces turned toward her. Lucien sat on the throne, resplendent in gold. Lady Isolde stood beside him, pale and trembling. Lord Dorian was there, and Cassian, and every noble who'd ever smiled at her while sharpening knives behind their backs. They walked her down the center aisle. The crowd parted in silence. Serafina kept her head up, back straight, eyes forward. She'd been broken, betrayed, beaten. But she hadn't surrendered, not the parts that mattered. They stopped in front of the throne. Lucien stood. Citizens of the Empire, he began, his voice carrying across the hall. Today we witness justice. Empress Serafina Vale stands accused of treason, of forgery, of attempting to overthrow your emperor. The evidence is overwhelming, the guilt undeniable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But before sentences passed, Lucien continued, I will give her a chance to confess, to admit her crimes before the people she tried to deceive. He looked at Serafina. Well, confess. Serafina took a breath. I confess, she said clearly, that I tried to remove a corrupt emperor who's been stealing from his own people for years. Gasps. Lucien's face darkened. Careful. I confess, Serafina continued louder, that I gathered evidence of grain theft, illegal trade, and conspiracy. Evidence that implicated you and a dozen of your closest allies. Silence. And I confess, Serafina said, that I failed, because I trusted the wrong people, because I underestimated how deep the corruption ran, because I thought truth mattered more than power. She paused. But I was wrong about one thing. What's that? Lucien said coldly. I'm not alone. The side doors burst open. Kira and her fighters poured into the hall, 30 of them, armed, faces covered, moving with brutal efficiency. The crowd erupted into screams, guards rushed forward, and then the witnesses entered. Through the servants' entrance, 23 men and women, ragged and scarred, walking into the grand hall like ghosts stepping out of graves. One of them, an old man with a cane, stepped forward. My name is Garrett Kane, he said, his voice shaking but clear. I'm a farmer from the northern provinces. 3 years ago, Imperial soldiers took my entire harvest, told me it was taxes. I watched my grandchildren starve to death that winter. Another voice. A woman missing an arm. My name is Sarah Van. I'm a baker from the Eastern Quarter. Lord Hemming's men burned my shop when I couldn't pay their protection fees. My husband died in the fire. Another. A young man with scars covering his face. My name is Thomas Riel. I'm a soldier. I watched General Ward order the execution of 40 prisoners who'd surrendered. No trial, no mercy, just murder. More voices, more stories, each one a blade cutting through the carefully constructed lies. The nobles looked horrified, confused, uncertain. Lucien's face was white with rage. Seize them, he roared. All of them. The guards moved, and Kira's fighters met them head-on. Steel clashed, blood sprayed. The grand hall transformed into a battlefield. Serafina moved, Her hands were still shackled, but the chain was long enough. She spun, brought her wrists down on the guard behind her, felt bone crack, grabbed his sword before he fell. Lucian lunged for her. She blocked. Barely. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms. They circled each other. The Emperor and the Empress. "You can't win this," Lucian snarled. "I already have," Seraphina said. "Everyone here just heard the truth." "Truth doesn't matter," Lucian screamed. "Power matters. Control matters. I could butcher everyone in this room and the Empire would still be mine." He struck. Fast. Brutal. Seraphina parried. Her arms screamed. Her lungs burned. She wasn't trained for this, wasn't strong enough, wasn't fast enough. But she was desperate enough. And desperate people fought like they had nothing to lose. Because they didn't. She ducked under his swing, drove her shoulder into his chest. They hit the ground together, rolled. She ended up on top. Raised the blade, hesitated. Lucian's eyes widened. "Do it!" Seraphina's hand shook. This was it. The moment. The choice. Kill him and become everything she'd fought against. Or spare him and risk everything she'd sacrificed for. In the background, the battle raged. Kira fighting 3 guards at once. The witnesses still shouting their stories. Captain Vex standing frozen, his sword halfway drawn, his face torn. And Seraphina realized something. This wasn't about Lucian. The end. It never had been. It was about breaking the cycle. About proving that power could exist without corruption. That justice could exist without cruelty. That you could tear down an empire without becoming the monster you were fighting. She lowered the blade. Lucian stared at her. "You're weak." "No," Seraphina said. "I'm done." She stood, turned to face the hall. "Emperor Lucian Draven is guilty of treason, theft, and conspiracy," she called out. "I have 23 witnesses, documented testimony, and a hall full of nobles who've just seen the truth. I'm not asking for his execution. I'm asking for a trial, a real one, in front of the people." The fighting slowed, stopped. Everyone stared at her. And then Captain Vex did something that would change everything. He sheathed his sword, walked to the center of the hall, and knelt before Seraphina. "Your Majesty," he said, "I stand with you." One by one, guards across the hall lowered their weapons. Knelt. Lucien scrambled to his feet. "What are you doing?" "I order you to stand. I am your emperor." "No!" Cassian's voice rang out. He stepped forward from the crowd, blood on his armor, face grim. "You're a thief and a liar. And I chose the wrong side." He drew his sword and drove it into the ground at Seraphina's feet. "I stand with the Empress." The hall erupted. Nobles shouting, some running, some kneeling. The empire fracturing in real time. And Seraphina stood at the center of it all, shackled and bleeding and more powerful than she'd ever been with a crown. Because power, she finally understood, wasn't something you took. It was something people gave you when they believed you deserved it. Lucien stood alone, surrounded, defeated. He looked at Seraphina with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he whispered. "Yes, it is," she said. And then the doors burst open one final time. Lord Dorian strode in, flanked by 50 Imperial guards still loyal to Lucien. His sword was drawn. His face was cold. And Seraphina realized with sinking horror that she'd forgotten one crucial thing. Dorian wasn't done playing. Lord Dorian stood in the doorway of the Grand Hall with 50 Imperial guards behind him and a smile that said he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The smile of a man who'd orchestrated every move from the beginning and was about to collect his victory. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. She'd been so focused on Lucien, on the witnesses, on breaking through the lies, that she'd forgotten the most dangerous player on the board, the one who'd never wanted the throne for himself. He wanted the chaos. "Stand down," Dorian said calmly, his voice carrying across the hall. "All of you, drop your weapons. This ends now." Captain Vex rose from his knees. His hand went to his sword. "Lord Dorian, you're interfering with..." "With what?" Dorian interrupted. "A coup. An uprising. A hall full of traitors and rabble trying to overthrow the rightful emperor." He gestured to his guards. They spread out, blocking every exit, weapons drawn. The people who'd knelt for Seraphina looked uncertain now, trapped, outnumbered. Kira moved to Seraphina's side, blade still wet with blood. "We can fight our way out." No, you can't, Dorian said pleasantly. You're exhausted, wounded, surrounded. You'd be dead before you reached the doors. Seraphina's mind raced. She'd planned for Lucian, planned for the guards, planned for resistance from the nobles. But she hadn't planned for Dorian to have his own private army inside the palace. Why? She asked quietly. Dorian tilted his head. Why what, Your Majesty? Why help Lucian? You gave me evidence. You pushed me toward rebellion. You set this whole thing in motion. I did, Dorian agreed, because I needed you to try, needed you to gather all the discontents, all the rebels, all the people who might challenge imperial authority. And then I needed you to bring them all here, into one room, where they could be dealt with permanently. Understanding hit Seraphina like a fist to the gut. This was never about Lucian winning or losing. It was about Dorian eliminating every threat to imperial power in one move. The corrupt nobles, the rebellious commoners, the guards who'd shown disloyalty, even Seraphina herself, all of them gathered in one place, all of them about to die. You're going to massacre everyone in this hall, she said. Not everyone, Dorian replied. The nobles who stayed loyal will survive, as will the emperor, wounded, humiliated, but alive, and grateful to the minister who saved him from a violent uprising. He smiled. I'll be the hero, you'll be the cautionary tale, and the empire will be stronger for it. Lucien Stichot stood near the throne, his face pale, finally understanding that he'd been a pawn too. Dorian, he said hoarsely, you can't. I can, Dorian said, and I will. Unless you'd like to join the dead, Your Majesty, I suggest you step aside. Lucian looked at Seraphina, at the guards, at the witnesses huddled together. Then he stepped aside, and something in Seraphina's chest turned to stone. This was the man she'd spent 17 years married to, the man she'd tried to save the empire from, the man who'd betrayed her, humiliated her, stolen from his own people. And in the end, he was just a coward, too weak to rule, too selfish to care, too broken to even fight for his own throne. Dorian raised his hand. The signal. His guards leveled their crossbows, and Seraphina made a choice, not out of heroism, not out of nobility, but out of the cold, hard truth that had been building in her chest since the moment she walked back into this palace. Some things were worth dying for. Not empires, not crowns, not even justice, but the chance to prove that cruelty didn't always win. Wait, she called out. Dorian paused, his eyebrow raised. Yes, Your Majesty, kill me first. The hall went silent. Dorian's smile widened, trying to buy them time. How predictable. I'm not buying time, Seraphina said. I'm offering you a better story. Dorian's smile faltered slightly. Explain. You want to be the hero, Seraphina said. Fine. But heroes don't massacre unarmed civilians. They execute traitors. So execute me. Publicly. Make me the villain. Let everyone else live and you'll have your cautionary tale without turning the entire hall into a graveyard. Why would I do that? Because, Seraphina said, if you kill everyone here, you're just another butcher. The empire might fear you, but they'll never trust you, never follow you. You'll spend the rest of your life putting down rebellions. She took a step forward. The chains on her wrists clinked. But if you spare them, if you show mercy, you become the man who saved the empire without bloodshed. The minister who stopped a coup and brought peace. That's power that lasts. Power that builds dynasties. Dorian stared at her, his mind working through the angles. Behind Seraphina, Kira whispered urgently. What are you doing? What I should have done from the beginning, Seraphina whispered back. Choosing who lives. No, Captain Vex said, stepping forward. Your Majesty, you can't. Stand down, Captain, Seraphina said quietly. Vex's face twisted. But that's an order. The words hung in the air, and slowly, painfully, Vex stepped back. Dorian watched this exchange with calculating eyes. Then he lowered his hand. The guards lowered their crossbows. You have a deal, Dorian said. Your life for theirs, but everyone in this hall witnesses your execution, and they swear loyalty to the crown, no exceptions. Agreed, Seraphina said. Cassian pushed through the crowd. His face was drawn, haunted. Seraphina, there has to be another way. There isn't, she said simply. I can't watch you die for my mistakes. You won't have to, Serafina said. You'll be too busy making sure what I started doesn't end with me. She held his gaze. Cassian's jaw worked. His hands clenched into fists. Then he nodded once. Sharp. Final. I'll finish it, he said hoarsely. Good. Serafina turned back to Dorian. How do you want to do this? Dorian gestured to his guards. They brought forward an executioner's block. Heavy wood, stained dark. The sight of it made Serafina's stomach turn, but she forced her face to stay calm. They positioned it in the center of the hall. Serafina walked toward it. Her legs felt distant, numb, like they belonged to someone else. The crowd parted. She heard someone crying. One of the witnesses, an old woman who'd testified about losing her sons. Serafina stopped, looked at her. Thank you, the woman whispered. For trying. Serafina's throat tightened. I'm sorry I failed. You didn't fail, the woman said. You made us visible. Those words stayed with Serafina as she reached the block. She made us visible. Not powerful, not saved, not victorious, just visible. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could do in the end. Shine a light on the truth and hope someone else carried it forward. She knelt. The wood was cold against her knees, rough against her palms. Behind her she heard movement. The executioner taking his position. The sound of steel being drawn. She closed her eyes. Thought about 17 years of marriage, of crown, of silent suffering and careful smiles, and the slow death of becoming someone she didn't recognize. She thought about the moment she'd picked up that letter at the banquet and chosen silence. And she thought about everything that had come after. The betrayals, the violence, the desperate gamble that had brought her here. Had it been worth it? She didn't know. But she'd tried. That had to count for something. Your Majesty, Dorian said, any last words? Serafina opened her eyes, looked out at the hall, at the nobles, the guards, the witnesses, Kira, Cassian, even Lucian standing pale and broken near his throne. Yes, she said clearly, the Empire is dying. Not from rebellion, from rot. From men who take and call it leadership. From systems that crush people and call it order. I couldn't fix it, but someone will. And when they do, I hope they remember that power without accountability is just tyranny wearing a crown. She paused. And I hope they build something better. Silence. Then Dorian nodded to the executioner. The blade rose. And in that frozen moment, Serafina felt something strange. Not fear, not regret, peace. Because for the first time in 17 years, she'd told the truth and meant it. She'd stood for something that mattered. She'd chosen sacrifice over survival. And whether or not it changed anything, whether or not anyone remembered, whether or not the Empire learned, she'd been real. The blade started to fall, and Captain Vex's sword blocked it with a crash that shook the hall. He stood between Serafina and the executioner, his blade crossed with the falling axe, his face set in grim determination. No, he said. Dorian's face darkened. Captain Vex, stand down immediately or what? Vex said. You'll kill me too. Fine, but you'll have to kill every guard in this hall who remembers their oath. One by one, guards across the room drew their swords. Not all of them, maybe half, but half was enough. Dorian's face went pale. This is mutiny. This is justice, Vex said. The Empress is right. The Empire is rotting, and you're part of the disease. He looked at Serafina. We swore to protect the crown, not the man wearing it, and right now you're the only one who deserves that protection. Serafina stared at him, at the guards standing with him, at the impossible thing happening. They were choosing her, even knowing it would cost them, even knowing Dorian still had 50 men, even knowing they might all die. They were choosing truth over orders. Dorian's hand went to his sword. His guards raised their crossbows again. And then Lucien spoke. Enough. Everyone turned. The Emperor stood at the foot of his throne. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the crown was crushing him instead of elevating him. Enough, he repeated. No more blood. No more games. He walked slowly down the steps, stopped in front of Dorian. You wanted to be the power behind the throne, Lucien said quietly. Congratulations. You won. But I won't let you turn this hall into an abattoir. Not for me. Not for anyone. He looked at Serafina. Their eyes met. And for just a moment she saw the man she'd married. Before the crown. Before the corruption. Before everything broke. I'm sorry, he said simply. 2 words. 17 years late. But he meant them. Serafina could see it in his eyes. Lucien turned to Vex. Release her. Dorian's face went purple. Your Majesty, you can't. I just did, Lucien said. Consider it my last act as emperor. The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles shouting, guards arguing, Dorian screaming about treason and order and consequences. But Vex moved. He broke Serafina's chains with 2 sharp strikes of his blade. She stood. Free. For the first time in 17 years. Free. Dorian lunged for her. Cassian's blade met his throat. Move and you die, Cassian said coldly. Dorian froze. The hall slowly quieted, and Serafina realized she was standing in the exact center of the grand hall, surrounded by people waiting for her to speak, to lead, to decide what happened next. She was exhausted, battered, still wearing a blood-stained dress and borrowed boots, but she was standing, and that meant she had a choice to make. Execute Dorian and become the thing she'd fought against. Spare him and risk him trying again. Walk away and let the Empire collapse into civil war. Or do something harder, something no one expected. She looked at Lucien. You're abdicating. It wasn't a question. Lucien nodded slowly. Yes. Who leads? The council, Lucien said. Temporarily. Until a proper succession can be established. Serafina turned to Lord Dorian. You're under arrest, not for execution, for trial. Every crime, every scheme, every lie, witnessed and documented. You wanted to write history, fine, but you don't get to write your own innocence. Dorian's face twisted. You can't hold me. I have allies, resources, power. You had power, Serafina corrected. Now you have a cell. She gestured to Vex. Take him. Guards moved forward. Dorian struggled, screamed threats and promises and curses. They dragged him away. The hall fell silent again. Serafina looked at the witnesses, still huddled together, still terrified. You're free to go, she said. With compensation, land, resources. Whatever the Empire can provide to make amends, it won't erase what you suffered, but it's a start. The old woman who'd thanked her earlier stepped forward. What about you, Your Majesty? What happens to you? Serafina took a long breath. This was the moment. The question she'd been avoiding since the chains broke. What happened to an empress without an empire? I don't know, she admitted, but I'll figure it out. She looked at Cassian. The Northern Territories still need a governor, someone who actually gives a damn. Interested. Cassian stared at her, then smiled, faintly. It'll take years to rebuild. Good, Serafina said. You're patient enough to do it right. She looked at Kira. You and your people. You've been invisible too long. The council needs voices from the lower city. People who know what the Empire looks like from the bottom. Kira's eyes widened. You're serious. Dead serious, Serafina said. Unless you'd rather go back to killing people in alleys. Kira laughed. It was surprised, almost hopeful. All right, but I'm keeping my blade. Good. Serafina turned to Vex. Captain, the guard needs reform, new training, new accountability. Think you can handle that? Vex straightened. Yes, Your Majesty. And don't call me that anymore, Serafina said. I'm not the Empress. Not anymore. Then what are you? Vex asked quietly. Serafina thought about that. She'd been a princess, a wife, an empress, a prisoner, a rebel, a traitor. She'd been every role the Empire demanded, but underneath all of it, stripped of titles and crowns and expectations, who was she? Just a woman who refused to stop trying. Just someone who'd learned that power wasn't something you held. It was something you gave away to people who'd use it better. Just a person who'd survived. I'm Serafina, she said finally. That's enough. The hall was silent. Then slowly people began to kneel. Not in submission, not in fear, in respect. Serafina looked at them. At the faces she'd fought for, bled for, almost died for. And she realized something that would have terrified her a month ago, but now just felt true. She didn't need to be empress to matter. She didn't need a crown to change things. She just needed to keep showing up, keep fighting, keep making sure that the people with power remembered the people without it. That was enough. That was everything. She turned and walked toward the doors. Behind her, the empire began the slow, painful work of putting itself back together. 3 months later, Serafina stood in a small house on the edge of the capital. Not a palace, not a manor, just a house. 2 rooms, a garden, a view of the city below. She'd bought it with money she'd saved over the years, money that was hers, not the empire's, not Lucien's, hers. The garden was a mess, overgrown, wild. She'd been working on it for weeks, pulling weeds, planting vegetables, learning how to make things grow instead of just managing what already existed. Her hands were dirty, her back ached, she had dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her brow, and she was happier than she'd been in 17 years. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She stood, brushed off her hands, opened it. Mira stood on the threshold, alive, scarred, one arm in a sling, but alive. Serafina's breath caught. "You're stubborn," Mira said. "Cassian pulled me out of the hall before I bled out completely. Took me 3 months to heal, but here I am." Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled Mira into a careful hug. They stood like that for a long moment, then Mira stepped back. "So, this is where you've been hiding." "Not hiding," Serafina said. "Living. Looks good on you." Serafina smiled. "Come in. I'll make tea." They sat in the small kitchen, drank bad tea because Serafina was still learning how to brew it properly. Talked about everything and nothing. The empire was stabilizing. Slowly. The council had implemented reforms, redistributed grain, arrested corrupt officials. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be for generations. But it was better. Cassian was rebuilding the north. Kira had formed a citizens' assembly. Even Lucien, stripped of his crown and confined to a remote estate, was reportedly writing memoirs no one would ever read. And Serafina was growing vegetables. It felt right. "Do you miss it?" Mira asked eventually. "The palace. The power." Serafina thought about that. "Sometimes. When I hear about a policy I'd have done differently, or see someone suffering who shouldn't be, but I spent 17 years with power, and it didn't make me happy. It didn't make me good. It just made me careful." She set down her cup. "I don't want to be careful anymore. I want to be real." Mira smiled. "You were always real. You just had to tear down an empire to remember it." Serafina laughed. It was light, genuine. Outside, the sun was setting over the capital, painting the rooftops gold. The same city she'd ruled for 17 years, the same streets, the same people. But everything felt different now. Because she was different. Not broken, not fixed, just changed. And change, she'd learned, was the only thing that ever really mattered. She'd been a girl who became an empress, who became a rebel, who became herself. And in the end, that last transformation was the hardest and the most important. Because empires rose and fell. Crowns were won and lost. Power shifted like sand. But the person you became when everything was stripped away, that lasted. That was real. Serafina stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, people were suffering, struggling, fighting to survive. She couldn't fix all of it, couldn't even fix most of it, but she could grow vegetables. She could share what she had. She could keep telling the truth and supporting the people trying to build something better. She could keep showing up. And maybe that was what power really meant, not the ability to control, but the willingness to keep trying even when you'd lost everything, even when you'd failed, even when no one was watching. Mira joined her at the window. "What are you thinking?" Serafina smiled. "That I spent 17 years waiting for permission to matter, and I finally figured out I never needed it." She turned away from the city, back to her small house, her messy garden, her imperfect, complicated, beautiful life. And for the first time since that letter fell at the banquet, since the world shattered and reformed and shattered again, she felt whole. Not because she'd won, not because she'd saved anyone, not because history would remember her kindly, but because she'd faced the worst version of herself, the worst version of her empire, and chosen to build something better from the ruins. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. The kind that lasted. The kind that changed you. The kind that proved cruelty didn't always win. Sometimes, if you fought hard enough, if you sacrificed enough, if you refused to stop even when everything said you should, sometimes truth survived. And that was worth everything it cost. P.